Hello and welcome to the Help Your Child Stop Hitting webinar. I'd first like to start with an acknowledgement of country. So I acknowledge the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples as the custodians of the lands, waterways and sky from where I am today. You might know it as Canberra in Australia. I pay respect to the past and present Ngunnawal and Ngambri elders. And to support Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children to be educated in their own language, please do check out the work of Children's Ground at childrensground.org. So having Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children educated in their own language is far more culturally appropriate than being educated in English, and also helps to preserve the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander languages. So because of the fact that people are less likely to be educated in their own language, and because of various other factors in our local culture, these languages are under a lot of threat. And this is one of the ways that we can preserve the languages and also be much more culturally appropriate for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children. So if you're interested in that work, I highly recommend checking out Children's Ground work and maybe even donating if that's something that would be of interest to you. So my name's Jodie Thornton. I have 4 children who are 26, 23, 11 and 9. We are past birthday season now, and so I don't have to concentrate anymore when I think of how old they are. And I have a granddaughter who is 3, and we are a blended family. So my 2 older children are from my husband's first marriage. I met them when they were 5 and 8. And our younger 2, who are 11 and 9, my husband and mine together. So being part of a blended family was how I got into this work. So over the years, I had consulted social workers and psychologists along the way whenever we came up against, the normal blended family challenges. And it wasn't until, I really did feel like I got the kind of help that I needed, but I also felt like there was parts missing. So there was a lot of support to understand how my upbringing shaped how I saw parenting and how I participated in, the adult relationships as well. But there wasn't a lot of practical support on what does that mean I have to do when the kids are not listening, or what does that mean when I have to do when the kids are having big feelings, like where does that take me? Where does it go? And so that's kind of how I ended up doing this work. I'm also healing the bossy / people pleaser cycle. So for me personally, I've always been seen as a strong-willed person and, being told I was too bossy, and then cycling into people pleasing because there wasn't really a way, when I was little, there wasn't really a way to get my own needs met at the same time as somebody else. So I either had to choose between being the bossy person who told everyone how things were going to go, or being the person who acquiesced to everybody else. So I've done a lot of work on that over the years, but I'm still finding there's little places where this cycle is hiding in how I relate to other people. And so I'm still noticing and hearing that as I find it. So today we are going to focus on how to proactively reduce the likelihood of your child hitting, and how to respond in the moment your child hits that builds their ability to choose a different behavior without invalidating their feelings. So I'd love to know, what have you tried to stop your child hitting? The most common strategies I hear are saying it's okay to be angry and it's not okay to hit, or saying gentle hands, suggesting that your child hits a pillow, asking them to use your words, using time out or time in, having empathy for others, breathing exercises. Look, just let it keep going until they develop impulse control, yelling, punishments and consequences. And for most of the parents that are interested in my work, the yelling, punishments and consequences is not what we want to be doing, but it can be where we end up when we don't have a better option, and it's hard to either protect younger siblings, or it's hard to stay regulated because you really need it to stop, and you end up in that place because even though it's not values aligned, you really need it to stop. And having said that, a lot of parents who even end up using those approaches, it still doesn't work, right? So it's, even though it's not values aligned, it's not working anyway. And so we're still stuck in that place, even if we were willing to compromise our values. So we need a developmentally appropriate way to actually stop the hitting. So it's not just about having something that validates your child's feelings and just waits for them to grow out of this phase. Because if we look at all the factors that happen if we don't, so we need to protect the children's siblings and friends, right? So whether they're younger children, younger siblings, or even older siblings, we don't want ongoing hitting to be part of their standard relationship. We don't want those children, those other children, to be stuck in the cycle of feeling that it's okay that I get hit, or even though people tell me it's not okay, it still keeps happening. And so the impact on their nervous system is the same. We really want to get it to truly stop. We also want to prevent our partners or exes disengaging with gentle parenting. So this is one of the most common reasons that someone who's not fully bought into gentle parenting will say, you know, if we can't stop our children from hitting, then it's just not going to work. It's just not a viable strategy. And that causes a lot of, obviously, disagreements. It can cause a lot of strain on the relationship when you have, whether it's your romantic relationship or a co-parenting relationship, causes a lot of strain when you have different approaches. And also it causes a lot of strain when one or both of you is trying to convince the other one that their approach is wrong, right? This causes a lot of strain in a lot of relationships that I hear about. We also want to protect the relationships that our children have with other people. So that's both the kids that are being hit, but also those other adults who don't understand that children are too young to have impulse control. And whilst it would be great if we could help everybody to understand why old school approaches are not emotionally appropriate for children, the reality is that it's 11 billion times quicker to teach a child not to hit than it is to teach an adult who disagrees with gentle parenting as a strategy to protect a child's emotional development. And that, like, I totally understand the reservation that people have from putting this onto a child. But if we take it from a different perspective, is that if your partner or ex was bought in or indifferent to what approach you use, you would just teach them to stop hitting anyways. The only reason you wouldn't the only reason you wouldn't teach them to stop hitting is if you didn't have the skills, right? And so if you do have the skills, you can choose to put those skills towards getting somebody fully bought into gentle parenting or getting your child to stop hitting, and one is quicker than the other, right? So why not help our children and not wait for the adults in their lives to catch up? We want to just get straight onto that and help them with their feelings. We also want to avoid the risk of you losing your cool. So when you lose your cool, obviously it feels horrible. It also ends you up in this constant cycle of having to do repair and apologize for something that, you know, probably has happened before, right? Saying it's not okay that I spoke to you that way, or it's not okay that I reacted that way, or it's not okay, you know, all these behaviors that we want to apologize for. So good that we're taking accountability, so good that we're doing the repair process. But ultimately, we want to spend less time doing repair, more time in enjoying each other and just creating positive memories rather than repairing from tricky memories. But also, we want to get out of that cycle, right? We don't want to be in a cycle of doing things that we're not comfortable with and then having to repair from them. We don't want to have that potential for baggage to be created. We just want to move forward and not have to deal with this. Now, hitting also inherently means they're not getting their needs met. And I say that because the only reason a child will hit is because they're either so dysregulated that they are not choosing a behavior, they're just reacting, which means they're dysregulated. They need nervous system regulation. It's important for them. The second reason a child will hit is if they think it's the best or the only way to get their needs met. Right? There is no universe in which hitting is getting your child their needs met. In that case, we know that if they're hitting, there's an underlying need not getting met. Now, the last reason that I think is really important to think about is that the process of learning not to hit actually develops their emotional awareness and their communication skills. And so it's actually really useful for them in like just separately from the hitting, right? It's really useful for them in their relationships with other people. It's really useful for them in their ability to just be regulated anyways. It's really useful for them to just really enjoy their lives, right? And so we want to not wait for your child to get out of this phase by just growing up. We want to get straight onto it as soon as we have the time and energy to do so. If we look at why the standard approaches suck, so I just was talking about why the two reasons a child will hit are either emotionally dysregulated to the point that they're choosing a behavior, they're not choosing the behavior, they're just reacting, or they think this is the only or best way to get their needs met. And all of the standard approaches are steeped in one or both of control your behavior even though you're dysregulated. Now, the only way to do that is to suppress the feelings or have impulse control, right? Now, most children don't have impulse control when they're young. There's a lot of different age ranges quoted as to when children develop impulse control. If your child is definitely in the camp that they should have impulse control, well, if they're not able to control their impulses, they're not able to control it, right? Even if they're past that stage. And I always come back to, like I'm 43, there's certain impulses of mine that I wish I could control better, and I think that, and even if we look at most gentle parents would say, it's really difficult not to yell, or if not yell, it's really difficult not to disengage emotionally, right? Those are our kind of two options, as we can express our dysregulation or we can internalize it. And so either way, we're disconnecting from our children. And most gentle parents would say it's really, really hard for me to control that impulse. So even if your child's old enough to have impulse control, we don't want to rely on that. We don't want to rely on suppressing feelings. Suppressing feelings, first of all, is the slow way to change. It's very, very difficult to learn to suppress your feelings. And secondly, suppressing feelings leads to people pleasing, right? The more you suppress what's important to you, what your own values, your own needs in the moment, the more likely you are to focus on just what everybody else needs and not your own needs, right? So that's where really getting into that place where they're more likely to be people pleasing and more likely to enter into relationships that aren't healthy for them in a two-way street. Now, the second thing that the standard approaches are steeped in is getting your need met is not important. Whether you impact other people negatively is important, right? If we think about what that looks like, somebody did something to you that was not okay, but it wasn't violent. You hit back. All the standard approaches are focused on is it's not okay for you to hit. You've crossed a line. And it is true. Lashing out physically is crossing a line, and we don't want to resort to that. But the focus is not on what led you to be in the place that you needed to hit and how can we solve that problem in a different way. The focus is on no matter what happens, you never hit. And again, that comes back to people pleasing and relies on you suppressing your feelings. Again, even if we agree, and I think most people do, like there is a line where we go, we're not going to use violence. However, if we are achieving, we're not going to use violence by suppressing your own feelings, we're going to end up in people-pleasing space, right? And as well, again, it's the slow way. It's a much slower way to learn to change by suppressing your feelings than it is to learn to just understand your feelings and get those needs met directly. So if we look at then what are we going to do, right? The first thing we want to focus on, as we know, the first reason that a child will hit is because they're so dysregulated, they're not choosing the behavior. If we think about what regulation in the moment means, what most people actually mean is that you behave differently to how you feel inside. That's not regulation. That's suppression, right? What we really mean when we say regulation is that your behavior is matching your feelings, right? But your behavior is driven from understanding your feelings and getting the underlying needs met, not being reactive, right? That's true regulation. when we think about no matter what happens, I'm not going to get reactive, well, what that means is we're just suppressing our feelings, right? And so then we want to really recognize the difference between regulation and suppression. And this is why when we say in the moment when they're upset, we say take a deep breath or do your breathing exercises or punch a pillow or all these other things. It's like what we're saying to them is you should calm down and it's okay if you don't get what you need, which in and of itself will further dysregulate your child. I was going to say deregulate. That's a whole different topic. But if they hear you, if they're what they think you're telling them is you should calm down and be okay, even if you don't get what you need, that will further dysregulate them, right? And that's not what we want. We want to move into a more genuine regulation space. And so the easiest way for us to do this is actually to do some preemptive regulation. And I recommend that you start here, whether your child is hitting really consistently or whether it's happening a little bit less often and infrequently. I still recommend you start with a preemptive regulation because what it will do is give us a little bit more space between your child's feelings coming up and them reacting, which is true whether they're hitting because they're dysregulated or whether they're hitting because they're trying to get their needs met. Either way, if we can create a little bit more space between the feeling coming up and them having to choose a response or move into reactivity rather than response, we have a little bit more space there. It gives us a chance to unpack what's really going on and solve the problem. And so to do this preemptive regulation, we're looking for two types of activities. The first one is ones that make them relax. So if your child will meditate, that's what we want to do. Many people laugh when I say if your child will meditate because the vast majority of children will not meditate. However, some children will. And so I always want to mention it just in case you have a child that will meditate. If you're in the camp that most of us are in, where your child will not meditate, we want to use something that whatever makes their body feels relaxed. So we're talking drawing, cuddles, massage, a weighted blanket, a stuffy that has like a really nice sensory appeal, like anything at all that will make their body feel relaxed. Now, if I highly recommend asking them, when does your body feel most relaxed? If your child is too little to really have a considered approach, it's a good habit to get them to ask. It also helps invite them to think about when is my body relaxed, and it gets you thinking about when do I notice through their body language and their behavior that their body is most relaxed. So still ask. You never know what you'll get. So my now 11-year-old would have been about 5 or 6 when I asked her, and she said when we're at the pool. And at the time, we weren't going to the pool very regularly, so I would never have guessed that. I'm so glad I asked her. Now, for me personally, at that time, increasing how often we went to the pool wasn't realistic. And so what I did was I made sure we had more time for baths as often, for longer baths as often as possible. And I filled the bath up higher, right? So that she was getting more of that sense of weightlessness and the pool sensation, right? And great. And then so the second type of activity is ones that make them laugh, with one exception, which is tickling. So anything that will make them laugh. So silliness, watching funny TV shows if they're allowed screen time, listening to funny podcasts or audiobooks, anything at all, reading funny books, anything at all that will make them laugh, except for tickling. The reason I say except for tickling activates both our fear receptors and our fun receptors. And so when we are trying to improve regulation, we don't want to be activating the fear receptors. So we want to really look at anything that makes them laugh except for things that involve tickling. Now, for these preemptive regulation activities, ideally we'll be doing them every day. So one of each kind every day. However, if it stresses you out to do that, that's counterproductive, because if you're dysregulated, that impacts on your children. So whatever you can do, whatever's realistic in your regular routine is great. If it's once a week, if it's once a fortnight, whatever you can do, just do that. Now, if regulation works, so if you just get started with trying preemptive regulation and all of a sudden your child doesn't hit anymore, please don't stop there. So by focusing on regulation, we get more time to problem solve before they get overwhelmed. But if your child only needed that little bit of extra regulation so they don't get overwhelmed anymore, well, our goal isn't just to stop them negatively impacting other people, remember? Our goal is to help them figure out what they need and find a way to get it that works for everyone involved. And so if you find that by doing those preemptive regulation strategies, I still want you to be doing the problem solving parts of the rest of the webinar when your child's negative feelings come up. So anything along the lines of frustration, anger, sadness, annoyed, anything that's in that feeling space that there's something going on, I still want you to be doing the problem solving part of that, even if the hitting has stopped. So now we're going to talk about what to do in the moment when your child is going to hit or has hit. I'm going to talk you through the ideal scenario, and there's going to be like choose your own adventures along the way. So anything that you can't do, there's a backup. And also, if your child is too young, we're going to talk about how if your child is too young to talk through the certain parts that we talk about talking, I'm going to talk you through that. So I just want you to know that there's always another way. That's one of my most important things, is that there is always another way to achieve the same parenting goal. But if you can't do all of this in the moment, because what we're doing is building up their skills to see their feelings coming and then problem solve, it's actually going to be okay, even if you just do a little bit at a time, or if you just do the backup strategies that I want to talk about. Either way is going to be fine. We will get there one way or another. So in the moment when your child is in that situation where they might hit, I want you to remember this picture where we've got a Venn diagram, and we've got one circle is what they need, the other circle is what the other person needs, and the overlap between those two circles is what works for both of them. Now, hitting is not in either of those circles. Like, hitting isn't even getting their needs met. And so I want you to take the perspective that your child isn't getting their needs met by hitting, because I think it's easy for us to fall into the way of thinking that they're hitting so that other people will acquiesce, or they're hitting because they think it's okay, or they're hitting because they don't have empathy for the other person. That none of that is actually true. We perceive that because of how our culture talks about people in general, but specifically children. And so we want to really remember that what we want to be focused on is that overlap of what works for both of the people involved, or multiple if there's more than two people involved. And so then if that's the case, right, if your child doesn't want to be hitting, they are just defaulting to hitting, why would we not just tell them not to hit? So if we think about this as like a fork in the road, and we've got two choices, we've got problem solving to the left and we've got hitting to the right, it's like there's a cloud over the road that goes towards problem solving, right? They cannot see that option. So they know that hitting doesn't get their need met, but it feels like the only choice, or it may feel like the best choice, right? And so if we say to them, do not hit, what they hear is, well, you're just not going to get your need met. So sorry about that. Or even, you shouldn't expect to get your needs met all the time, right? This is the cultural messages that we were given, and now we think that we should be passing those on. It's like, actually, well, just because you're not getting what you want doesn't mean that you get to hit, right? And that's really in order for them to accept that message, they have to get good at suppressing their feelings. Why do we think that that's a realistic option? Because we were all taught to suppress our feelings, right? we were all taught the slow way, which is suppress your feelings or else, right? And the or else might have been something quite awful that might happen to you or was threatened to happen to you, which I'm really sorry if that's what happened for you in your childhood. The or else also might have been something that doesn't feel as harsh, but is still very damaging for a child to hear, is that or else you won't be a good person, or else you won't receive my love. Like, or there's still an or else, right? So we were all taught to suppress our feelings. So our default approach is to suppress our feelings. We may have varying degrees of success at suppressing our feelings, but we're so good at it in comparison to a child who has not yet been taught to do that, that we think that it's realistic and it's a choice that you can make, right? You can just not lash out, when in reality, it's not that simple to just not lash out, right? And so what we want to introduce to our child is over and over and over again, we want to show them there is another option to take, that problem solving is available to them always, and that when they're little, we're going to be helping them to problem solve, but as they build the skills, they're going to start problem solving themselves. When they're little, we don't expect them to do the problem solving, but the older they get, the more they will just do it naturally if they've been shown that it will work and they've been helped to build the skills they need. And so where we want to get to is that they're aware their feelings are building up and they problem solve, right? That's where we want to get to. That's the end result we're trying to get to here. But if that doesn't work, so either they're too little, they haven't built the skills up, or the particular problem they're trying to solve is much trickier than they're used to. If that doesn't work, before they think that hitting is the only or best way to get their needs met, we want them to ask for help to problem solve. And that's true whether they're getting dysregulated. So we want them to notice, I'm getting dysregulated, I'm going to ask for help. Or if they're not dysregulated, they're just thinking, I'm stuck. I have no other way to get my needs met except for hitting somebody. We want them to stop before they get that impulse and ask for help. So initially it'll be you. Eventually we want them to be able to ask anyone who might be able to help. So that could be another adult who may or may not be a gentle adult, but it also could be their siblings or their friends. Like, there's many ways that we can solve problems, and we want to get them into that habit of asking for help. So our first step to get there, I'm just going to take a sip of tea, is if you see the hitting coming, so you get some kind of signal, you hear it in their voice, you see it in their body language, maybe you know that if their younger sibling tries to take their toy, then that's a high risk time, right? If you see it coming, your very first thing is to empathize. So really hold space for those feelings. So the best way to do that is to draw attention to their body, because it's 11 billion times easier for us to notice a change in sensation in our body because our feelings have changed than it is to actually notice a change in our feelings. So the first thing we want to do is that holding space for the feelings, drawing attention. So, oh, sweetie, your fists are really tight, or your eyebrows are really close together, right? Or I can see your jaw is like clamped shut tight, right? Something that draws attention to their body. We want them to notice the link between I'm feeling this way and my body feels that way, right? Then we want to reflect the need. So you're really needing to be able to play with the toys without your little brother taking them from you. You really want to finish what you've started without having to get your blocks back, right? Reflecting the need. Then we want to look for solutions that work for everyone involved, right? So is it that they need time to play in a separated so that they don't have to share toys? Is it that they can take turns? And I know that sounds unrealistic, but taking turns is much easier when you've had empathy and understood that your needs are important and will be met. Not necessarily always realistic, but it's much more realistic when they've had empathy first before it's been suggested as something that they should accept, right? So we're looking for, like, what is the way? So if we think about a really common experience is a sibling hitting a new baby sibling, right? Is it that they are feeling like the baby's getting all the attention, right? Then how do we get them attention before they try to hit, right? Is it that the baby is taking the toys? Well, how do we protect the older sibling's toys from the younger sibling? Right, we're looking for those solutions that work for everybody involved. Now, sometimes you won't be able to find a solution and you will need to say no. But if that's the case, say the reason why first. If you say, no, I can't, you can't have the cup first, it's her turn, that would further dysregulate them. If you say, I really want you to be able to have the cup, your sister hasn't had a turn more recently, and so I need to give her the turn first. You're preparing their nervous systems to understand that there's a good reason first, right? And that will really help them to be able to stay regulated while hearing the no. So now your next step. So this is the part we go to. If you see the hitting coming and you know that the problem solving isn't going to work quickly enough, or the hitting has already started, right? We want to protect the person being hit using the protective use of force. So the protective use of force is a phrase that I got from Marshall Rosenberg. I don't remember if it was his or if he got it from somewhere else, but I got it from him. And what he's talking about there is you're doing the minimum in order to protect somebody. And so in this context, that might be, you might put a cushion between two siblings who are trying to hit each other, right? It might mean that you're putting your hand up to stop them from hitting. Now, if your child is stronger, or what's the word? Like, I can't think of the word. It's like they're able to get around obstacles. Then putting a cushion up might not be enough. So you may need to hold their wrists, right? If that's a step up, but if it's necessary in order to protect the person being hit, then that's what we do. If, say, for example, your child is hitting you and you can't stay regulated, then you might need to put them in another room, or you might need to put yourself in another room, right? And what we're doing is the minimum we can to keep the protection going. So, for example, if your child is hitting you and it's either genuinely hurting you and you need to remove yourself because you're genuinely getting hurt, or alternatively, it might not be hurting you so much that you need to move into another room, but it might be that you're not able to stay regulated while they're trying to hit you. If you were to move yourself into another room, we're doing that to give you the chance to regulate and then come back out and help them, right? And so that, if ideally that would be quick, but maybe it's not quick, right? So what we're doing is doing the protective thing. So whatever we need to do to protect everybody involved, we do that. Now, if your child is hitting regularly, in an ideal world, we wouldn't leave them, we don't leave them without close supervision. So, for example, if two siblings are hitting each other just routinely and it's just not, it's not an out of the blue thing, it's just they're having a really hard time. And ideally, you would only have them playing together if an adult can be right near them. Now, obviously, not everyone has the privilege to be able to do that. So it might be that you don't have more than one adult available to supervise, or you're in a situation where the other adults involved are not able to handle it in a gentle fashion, or, there's a variety of reasons why we're not always able to do that. But what we want to do is, as often as possible, we want to make sure that if they're in a position where you think they might hit, that you'll be right there so that you can see the hitting coming and get close and be ready. If they're not hitting regularly, but you hear, oh, we're in that space where it might be happening, then wherever possible, you just stop what you're doing and go before the hitting happens as much as you can. Now, when we get to that point, right, we're validating the feeling and need, right? And so this is the part where a lot of people will say validate the need, but not the behavior. I don't want you to bring the behavior into it, right? Because what we're trying to do, remember, is getting them to notice the feeling coming up, recognize the feeling tells them about their need, and problem solve for the need. We don't need to stop the behavior if we focus on the problem solving. So if we just focus on, you were feeling frustrated and you really needed space, you were feeling frustrated and you really needed I'm gonna think of a different example. You were feeling frustrated, and you wanted a turn, right? Your sibling had that for ages, and you needed a turn, or you were feeling really angry because that's your toy, and you needed to know that it was safe, right? And so we're really just validating the feeling and the need. Now, if your child is little, I still want you to practice doing all of the talking I'm laying out in the examples here. The reason I want you to practice all of the talking, even if your child is too little to be able to participate, their receptive language is greater than their expressive language. And so sometimes they can understand just well exactly what we're trying to express. We just don't notice it because their expressive language is a little bit further behind. And that's just standard developmentally, right? I'm not talking about like there's just something wrong. It's just for children, receptive language is further advanced than their expressive language. Secondly, it gets you to practice it so that by the time your child does understand what you're saying, it's just your default response, right? It's just this is how you handle issues. And it can help you keep regulated. So if you can hear yourself saying, you were feeling this, you were needing that, it's much easier to keep your own focus on their feelings, their needs, and how do we solve the problem if you're talking about it rather than just allowing your nervous system to be unsupervised, for want of a better term. And then it's more likely to focus on the fact that you don't want them to be hitting and you've told them before and it's so frustrating and there's an impact and blah, blah, blah. It's much easier to keep you regulated if you focus on the verbal expression of the process. Now, for little kids, because they may not be able to tell you what they needed, if you know what it is, I want you to say it and help them get the need met before they hit. So the more you say the need, even if your child is too little to say it, the more they connect. Oh, yes, that is what I wanted, is I wanted to choose when I get to have a turn or something like that, right? And then also by helping them get the need met before they hit, whenever you can, we're connecting the feeling with the solution, because when kids are too little to have the discussion piece, then that it's kind of like we miss the opportunity to problem solve, right? So we just want to skip straight from I have this feeling to have this solution. Advantage is that for most little kids, it's usually simpler, usually easier to figure out. So you don't need to have the conversation as much, but sometimes it is tricky. And so when you don't know what the need is, I want you to experiment and see what works and what doesn't. So if I think maybe, I don't know what it is, but maybe it's autonomy. How can I get them more autonomy? Maybe it's connection. How can I get them more connection? Maybe it's fun, right? How do I get them more fun? Looking at what are the possibilities and just seeing, like giving it a try with the solution and seeing if it works or if it doesn't. And sometimes it's a little bit more trial and error. Sometimes it's easy because their needs are often more obvious and simpler. Sometimes you just have to keep going and giving it a crack. Now, for either age of child, so little kids or bigger kids, have we found the need? We want to check these three things. So the first thing is, does it feel valid? If you don't think it's valid, go deeper. So, for example, you just want everything your own way. That doesn't really feel valid, right? What could be underneath that? Is it fairness? Is it connection? Is it autonomy? Is it I can't think of the right word, but like predictability. So it's like they want to know that this is what's going to happen. So therefore, they feel like the comfort of routine. I can't think of what the stability, right? Stability, right? We want to look for like what could it be if it doesn't feel valid. The next one is, are there theoretically a million ways to get the need met? If it is a true need, there are so many strategies that could possibly meet the need. If it is just something that like there's only one way to do it, it's not a need, go deeper. When you find a strategy, when you try a strategy that works, does the feeling resolve? Right. So if it's connection, do I give them connection? Then does it does it feel like it's just a bottomless pit? Right? Is it just always connection? Then chances are it's either not the right need, or that strategy, the way you're trying to meet that need doesn't work for your child as an individual. And so then we want to experiment. Could it be a different need, or do we want to try a different strategy? Now, just a quick mention of commonly misunderstood needs. So a child that is really wanting their way or really wanting autonomy, often this is actually like a cover for a lot of other needs, because a child who comes across as really needing their way or really needing autonomy, sometimes yes, it is autonomy, right? Sometimes it truly is they wanting the ability to choose, but sometimes it's a matter of feeling like when we tell them that they can't have their way or they can't choose, what we're saying is you can't get what you need to acquiesce, right? That's different, because the need underneath might be connection, and they're saying no, it must be my way, because if I do it your way, I'm not getting the connection that I need, right? And so we really just want to be careful with their way or autonomy. We also want to be careful of attention and connection. So you'll see a lot of gentle parenting places talking about how attention seeking is actually connection seeking. And I got to tell you, yes, sometimes it's true, but a lot of time, I want to say the vast majority of time, I don't know that that's true, but a lot of time, the thing about connection is that it is a great way to cope with not getting your needs met. And so what a lot of people say, that's attention seeking behavior, and then we give them connection and it gets like it seems like it's getting better. That's actually because it's easier for your child to cope with the need of autonomy or novelty or competence or stability, like all these other things. If they're not getting that need met, it's easier to cope if they're getting a lot of connection. And so we just want to be really mindful of labeling things immediately attention seeking or connection seeking. We want to, sometimes it is, absolutely, sometimes it is. But one quick way is to look for, if the only way your child feels okay is constant connection, probably it's not connection, right? If and like the one that comes up so often is when you post in a gentle parenting group, my child is struggling with X behavior. In almost invariably, someone will say, how often are you having one-on-one time? And the thing is that if they are really starved of connection, then yes, that one-on-one time is so valuable. But so often, again, it comes back to that connection is just a better way to cope with not getting their needs met. So then they're more willing to acquiesce. And so we want to be really mindful of, could it be something else? Now, so then we're back to that place of problem solving together. So constantly looking for what you need, what they need, and what works for both of you. We want to really come back to, what does that look like? What are the options? And there's not just one option in that middle. There's so many different ways that we can get everybody's needs met. Now, there are times that we can't get the need met, and like sometimes it's genuinely impossible. But I honestly think that what's more likely the case is that there's just not enough time to figure it out. Because if we think about, like, one of the most common things that I'm helping parents with is like when there's only one adult and you're under time pressure and you need to get so many things done, and your children need something and they can't get it, and then that results in a problem, right? Reality is, we wouldn't, like, the reason we get into a position where one adult is responsible for lots of tasks that need to be done and the needs of a child, the reason we end up in that situation is because we don't have the villages that we're supposed to have. Like, our society has gotten itself into a place where we kind of get ourselves into a position where we can't always get everybody's needs met. And so we want to really frame that as it's not that it's impossible, it's that right at the moment we're not sure, right? Because the solution might be a village, which for most of us is not realistic to get the depth of village that would be required for us to always get our needs met. Some of us have great villages, some of us have less than great villages, but I don't think I know a single person who has the fullness and depth of village that would mean that always the adult and the children's needs could be met. Now, that should be how we live, but it's not right now. So we have to work with the reality that we're dealing with. So in those times where the needs can't be met, we want to reinforce that their needs matter. We want to let them know that you would meet the need if you could, so that they feel like that is a priority for you. We want to clearly explain what's in the way and then make a decision. So if your child is younger, it's going to be just you making a decision about what can be done in the situation, like what's the best available option that we have. If your child is older, then you can start to make decisions together. It's like, sweetie, I only have one pink cup and there's two of you that are wanting it. I don't really have a way to solve this. What do you think we could do? Right. And they can be part of the decision of like, this is not ideal. What can we do? They can be part of that. Like sometimes they'll be comfortable to acquiesce, sometimes they won't, sometimes it just won't be easy, but we can bring them into this, like this situation isn't ideal, but what are we going to decide? Now, if we are still in that position where we have big feelings, so their need hasn't been able to be met, you have done everything that you can to express that in a way that's useful. If you have the time and energy, empathize in the moment, do it then. If you don't, so you don't have the time or you don't have the energy, later is good, right? It's still helpful for you to bring it up with your child later to say, oh, sweetie, earlier when blah, blah, blah happened, how are you feeling? Now, some kids find it easier to talk about things that happened earlier and some kids don't. But for most kids, the older they get, the more they will be able to recall how they felt earlier and actually process it. And similarly to how I was talking about with just when kids are too little to talk things through, we still want to get in the habit to do it, right? We still want to invite our kids to do it until they're in the place where it works for them. And when we bring it back up again, we're reflecting those feelings and needs and recognizing as well that they're allowed to stay in the feelings. So if your child is sad that they didn't get what they wanted, we don't need to rush them to be comfortable with that, right? If they're sad, they're allowed to stay sad. They're allowed to choose. We want to get to a place where most of the time they're making a choice of what to do with the sadness. But some of the time, if they want to stay sad, they're going to stay sad, right? And so we want to get to a place where it's allowed for them to choose. I'm just sad about it. So if we're in a place where we could do some or none of what we just talked through, and for whatever in any way, shape, or form, it didn't go perfectly, right? So either we didn't prevent the hitting, we did prevent the hitting, but everybody had big feelings about it. Anything that went on where it hasn't gone exactly the way we would like, we want to do a do-over. So we want to wait until everybody has completely calmed down. When we bring it up, we want to bring back in that body awareness. What did you notice in your body? Before you hit, did you notice that you got tense in your hands? Did you notice anything happen inside your body, right? Bring that body awareness back into validating the feelings and needs, back into like the two of you just thinking, I wonder what would have worked in the moment. Like what would have been good for you and for your sister? What would have been good for you and good for me, right? Really doing that, practicing the problem solving. As we practice this, we're building the neural connections almost as well as if we'd done it that way in the moment. So the more we build those neural connections, we're building their connections to notice their feelings before they get overwhelmed, to recognize the needs, and to problem solve. So all three of those things are happening when we do a do-over. Now, you can do the do-over just yourself. It's like, gee, I wish I'd noticed that their voice really did change. And so I wish I'd stopped what I was doing and gone closer. Or you might be thinking, like, I wish I'd said this, or I wish that, whatever we can find as like what would have been better. And we want to imagine it in very specific details. What do you wish you had done with your body? What do you wish you'd done with your tone of voice? Which specific words would you have wished to use? And those are the pieces that build those neural connections, which makes it more likely that you'll be able to do it the next time, right? So those do-overs are really, really useful. Now, if you're in a position where you're having a lot of hitting, you don't have to do a do-over for every single one. Just do as many as you can, and we're building those neural connections so that it gets easier. So a big issue is, will I have time for this, right? It seems like a lot of work to be constantly noticing their feelings, to be constantly figuring out what are the underlying needs and problem solving together. But I want you to focus on a couple of things. So one is, whenever there's no time to negotiate, you just make a decision. What is the best available option that we have? And then when there's time, you get into that do-over to talk about options that might have worked. The more often you do that, so the more often you practice the do-over, it means you'll be clearer on both of your needs for the next time. So it'll get easier. So don't stress about doing it perfectly. It's just the more we get to identify those needs, the easier it will be at each time it goes on. And because you're building those neural connections almost as much as if you'd done it in the moment, it starts to become your default behavior, and it'll get easier and easier for you to do it as it comes up time and time again. The other thing to really recognize is that the more often your child recognizes that you're trying to meet both of your needs and that they get their needs met, the easier it is for them to accept the times when their needs can't get met. So that might mean that they give you a little bit more leeway in the time it takes to find a solution. And it also might mean that they're more comfortable with the idea that I can't get my needs met right now. I trust that they're going to get met another time. And so that then keeps them out of dysregulation. And it means you don't have to do the whole process every time. So the more they build that trust, the more it'll get easier. And as well, most people have just a few needs that are either currently persistently unmet or that are the most important to them as an individual. And so once you know those couple of needs, it's only going to take you so long to find ways to get everybody's needs met at the same time, just consistently in the routine parts of life. So like, you'll have ways of, like, if it's a rainy day and we would normally do outside time for regulation, we have an inside option for regulation. Like, there's, the more you practice this, it's just going to be part of your regular life. So you don't need to do this constant, like, identifying feelings and needs, like the process of identifying them and negotiating. That all goes away when it's just part of your natural life. And then we only need to problem solve when things change. So your child goes through a new developmental stage, you get a new sibling, relationship statuses change, or they move rooms at daycare, something will shift. And yes, you may need to revisit. So maybe the way you get their needs met needs to change, or maybe because they've hit a different stage of life or a different frame, a need that they previously got met consistently is now not getting met. So then we do need to problem solve again. But it's only from time to time as things change. And even then, as things change, the more you practice this, the quicker you both get at identifying the needs and finding creative solutions. So it's really, it sounds like a lot of steps, but it really, it'll become your default the more you do the do-overs, and B, the more you get skilled at finding those feelings, needs, and solutions, like it just becomes second nature. It really isn't a time-consuming thing. We just want to do as much as you can until it becomes your default. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. And so I think you can see the overall message here is that the goal isn't to stop the hitting. It's actually to teach your child to express what they need, to problem solve, and if they get stuck, to ask for help, right? And that's the case whether your child stops hitting or whether they continue to hit. We still want to get to that place where your child understands, like, is aware of their feelings, expresses what they need, and problem solves, right? That's what we want to be doing. Now, if you'd like my support to be able to get that to happen, I can help you over 4 weeks to really embed this as your default behavior. So one of the things that I'm really good at is finding the needs that are at play the most commonly when your child hits. So I'm really good at interpreting your child's behavior and interpreting the words that your child uses and what has happened in the situation. I'm really good at figuring out really quickly either what that need is or giving you something to try so we can figure out that need. So it really cuts down on the trial and error in that space. I'm also really good at finding solutions. And to be honest, some of that is just not being the person who's in the situation, right? You're just so close to it, you can't see. But also some of it is I've been doing this work for 8 years now, 9 years, I want to say. And so I've helped a lot of families. And so I've got a lot of options in things that have worked for other families. And so I can help you to find things that will work, that are realistic and practical in the situation that you have. I can also help you in those 4 weeks to get really confident at responding in the moment when they do hit. So to protect everybody that's involved and to hold space for their feelings when they can't get the need met so that they can learn to really sit with those big feelings without lashing out in a way that's emotionally validating. Now, for most parents, once we do those things, you don't actually need help to regulate your emotions anymore because the issue that's causing you to get dysregulated isn't happening, right? You feel like you don't feel powerless to help. You don't feel like this is a situation that's never going to end. You don't feel hopeless. Like there's all these feelings are no longer at play. But for some parents, it is still something that they need help with to regulate their emotions, and I can help you with that process as well so that you can keep your cool even when things go wrong. So for this 4-week package, I've got 5 spaces for $197, and you can get that by emailing me, so responding to any of the reminder emails that I send out about the webinar. And so that would be 45-minute Zoom sessions about a week apart is ideal because as you change how you respond to your child, they change how they behave. So we can really refine refine the approach as we go. So over that 4 weeks, you can expect that most kids will either stop hitting or hit very rarely. It's like 4 weeks is enough for us to really shift this. Now, for some kids, so it's either they're particularly intense in their personality or you've got a particularly challenging situation. They won't have stopped hitting and the hitting won't be down to rarely, but it'll be far less often. So it'll be much easier for you to be able to respond rather than react. And how you're responding to your child's emotions, whether they've stopped hitting or whether they're still hitting but at a much lower rate, your responses will be building your child's skills to notice their feelings, express themselves assertively and respectfully. And that will be the case even when you're not there and even when the other person isn't a gentle adult. So whether it's your partner or ex is not brought into gentle parenting, if your child knows how to express their feelings and needs, old school adults do very well when they understand what the root cause is. They don't do very well when they feel like your feelings are disproportionate or invalid or all of those things. But if they understand what the underlying need is, they actually do really well. And so and also the case if it's siblings or friends, right? So we're really helping them to build those relationships in a much healthier way, even, whether the hitting completely stops or whether the hitting is continuing at a lower frequency, then we're still, either way, we're building these skills so that they've got the skills for healthy relationships going forward. Now, just a note on what you don't need your partner or ex to be on the same page. So if your partner or ex would be enthusiastic to do this with you and they see the solution the same as you see it, then by all means we can do it together. But if your partner or ex is not both enthusiastic to make a change and they see the solution the same way as you, it's much faster for you to just get on and do this. Your child will learn much more quickly from you being fully bought in and doing it on your own, even if your partner or ex is not doing it at all, or even if they are making things harder, it's still because we're talking about building their skills to notice their own emotions and to solve problems. It doesn't need anyone else to help. Yes, it would be lovely if we all had many gentle adults in our children's villages, but we're just building a skill. It's like if your child was to learn algebra, they don't need to learn algebra from every single person in their life. They only need to learn algebra from one person who knows how to teach in a way that makes sense for them. That's all they need, right? Same goes for emotional regulation. You also don't need any particular amount of time or any other privilege. So, first and foremost, with the time factor, because the approach includes doing those do-overs, if you don't have the time to do it very often, we're just going to build the skill in the time that you have. If there's anything else, like the ability to, have another parent to look after the other children while you're talking to this one, or like any other privilege that would make this harder, I can tell you that I was a strong-willed child who grew up to be a strong-willed parent coach, and I will find a way. Whatever circumstances you have, I will find a way. I'm stubborn that way. I've never met a family I couldn't find a solution for, and you won't be the first. I can promise you that. Whatever it is, I will find a way because we're focused on building skills. And whatever, I can just assure you that my strong-willed nature comes out in very handy when it comes to this. I also don't need you to be able to stay regulated yourself. So the more we notice before you get dysregulated, you won't get reactive, right? And the more we do the do-overs, the more you'll build the neural connections to make it your default response. So if you're really struggling with your own regulation, we will still be able to get through that. And as I said, like for most people, once we resolve the root cause of the hitting, your regulation is just naturally follows. If that's not the case for you, I will help you in those 4 weeks to find ways to handle your own emotions so that you can stay true to the plan and also have a plan B if everything goes to crap. So I hope that has been really helpful. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email me. And hopefully, I'd love for you to jump in and grab one of those 5 spaces at $197 for the 4 week session. Thanks so much for being here.